Good evening, morning, and afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining us, Michigan-China Forum Annual Summit 2021, across time zones and borders tonight. Michigan-China Forum is a non-biased and innovative platform where diverse ideas and perspectives could be shared, respected, and inspired. This multicultural organization is officially registered at University of Michigan and is organized by a group of driven-minded U of M students across disciplines. Hi, I'm Mary Chen, Director of the Culture and Media panel. Let me start off tonight's event by quickly going through our agenda for the next 2 weeks. You're now watching our first panel, Seeking Identities in Social Media, which will be followed by Automotive, Business, Healthcare, US-China Relation panel. Now, let me introduce you to Professor Justin Huang, our moderator for tonight's panel. Professor Huang is the Assistant Professor of Marketing at Ross School of Business at U of M. His research draws from marketing, economics, statistics, and machine learning to examine the role of online platforms in curating our content consumption experience. He's also interested in the growth of Asian American media through online, non-traditional platforms, such as YouTube. Now, without further ado, let me pass it over to Professor Huang. And please enjoy.
Thank you so much, Meru, and welcome everyone. I'm very excited to have you all here. Thank you so much for tuning in, especially in the wake of some very tragic events that happened earlier this week. I want to just start us off with having just a brief moment of silence for the 8 individuals that were killed in a shooting in Atlanta, as well as the unprecedented wave of violence that we're seeing across the country directed towards Asian Americans. So if you would please join me for just a few seconds in silence. Thank you so much, everyone. I am very excited to be able to host this panel today, and we have an excellent range of speakers that represent both academic perspectives, old, more traditional media, as well as new media. Just to introduce some of the people that we have today, we have Vanessa Kong. Vanessa Kong is an Chinese-English bilingual screenwriter based in Los Angeles. In 2012, she graduated from Beijing Language and Culture University with a Bachelor of Arts degree in English Literature. Vanessa has translated scripts and subtitles for more than 200 feature films, TV shows, reality shows, as well as documentaries from English into Chinese. In 2018, she graduated from American Film Institute Conservatory with an MFA degree in screenwriting. Vanessa has co-written 2 award-winning short films, New Year's Eve and The Chef, the latter of which was also part of the work of our second representative for more traditional media, Hao Zheng. Hao Zheng is a recent Student Academy Award-winning director who has transitioned from being a professional actor in popular Chinese films and TV shows, with short films getting international recognition, including Show Me the Shorts New Zealand, Best International Film Award, AT&T Film Award, Nowness Awards, Short Shorts Tokyo, Aspen Short Fest, among more than 100 film festivals. He's developing a range of multicultural projects in both China and the United States. I'm also very excited to have Professor Robert M. Sellers. He is the Vice Provost for Equity and Inclusion and the Chief Diversity Officer, as well as the Charles D. Moody Collegiate Professor of Psychology here at the University of Michigan. Professor Robert M. Sellers is the Vice Provost of Equity, like I mentioned, and he's responsible for overseeing the university's 5-year strategic plan for diversity, equity, and inclusion. He also serves as the principal advisor to the president of the university. Along with the provost, Dr. Sellers recruits and retains diverse faculty. He works to develop academic programs that prepare all students for success in a diverse world. Of course, prior to joining the provost's office, Dr. Sellers was chair of the University of Michigan Department of Psychology. His research interests include ethnicity, racial and ethnic identity, personality and health, athletic participation, and personality. Finally, we have Mike Wu. Mike Wu is joining us from the popular YouTube channel CantoMando. CantoMando is a media brand and YouTube channel co-founded by 3 young Chinese Canadians, along with himself, Sheldon Ho, and Edward Leung. They are passionate about sharing Chinese food, language, customs, and other cultural elements in a genuine, relaxed, and comedic way, showing the cultural consciousness and self-confidence of the younger generation of ethnic Chinese. Their channel was established in 2016 and has already been subscribed to by more than 500,000 fans. I'm very happy to have all of you today. I just want to give a brief note before we get started with our panel discussion. You guys might notice in your Zoom setup that there is a button that says interpretation. So we have translation services available in both, well, you can hear us regularly in English, as well as the dialogue is translated into Mandarin. So if you want to listen along in Mandarin, please click down under interpretation and then select the Mandarin option. Thank you, everyone. All right. Let's hop into our panel discussion. So I already gave a little brief overview for all of you, but I wanted to give you guys also a chance to introduce yourselves, talk about some of the recent works that you've really been putting your efforts into. Let's kick it off with Vanessa. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you, Justin, for the introduction, and thank you, Michigan China Forum, for having us here. Yeah, I go by Vanessa here in the US. My Chinese name is Kong Leqi, and I came here in 2016 at the age of 26. This is the 5th year I've been here, and I live, I am located on Hollywood, right off Hollywood Boulevard. I've been here for the past 5 years. So yeah, that's a little about me and about my work, the current work that I'm working on. Majorly, there are 2 projects. One in English is called Water Tossing Boulders. It's a feature script, a period piece adapted from the book with the same name, about a family of Chinese immigrants led the first fight to desegregate schools in the Jim Crow South. And it's a story about this Chinese people in Mississippi Delta in the 1920s. And then I'm working on another project, which is a Chinese sci-fi anthology TV show. It's in the same vein as Black Mirror, and it's about the near future of all aspects of life in China. Some of my past work that's worth mentioning, one of them is The Chef. It's a short film that is Hao and my thesis film, and it did really well in the festival run, and it won a student Oscar in 2019. And then and the story is about a Chinese chef is forced to train a Caucasian android cooking Chinese food. But in the meantime, his former protege make it harder to by joining an anti-robot riot. And then another past work that was worth mentioning is my own project that I co-created with another Chinese producer from AFI that's called Talk Yellow to Me, which is a comedy pilot. And it's about this Chinese woman who aspires to be a stand-up comedian in Hollywood. On the verge of her visa expiration, she decides to steal raunchy material from her roommate, this other Chinese woman, and which creates a wedge in their airtight friendship. So, Talk Yellow to Me, I feel like if people who understand both Chinese and English, they will understand the double meaning in this title, because yellow is how, Westerners refer to our race, but also in Mandarin, it means huang. It means like kind of dirty, sexy, kind of that connotation. So I kind of use that in this comedy pilot to explore the, fetish for Asian women in that way, in a comedic way. So yeah, those are my current work and the past project.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. And in particular, you mentioning the fetishization of Asian women, it's of course an incredibly important topic given the events of the past week. So thank you so much for sharing that. Hao, do you want to kind of give yourself a little bit more introduction, talk a little bit about your current works?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Hao, but so I've been to the US for almost 11 years now. And when I first came here, my English teacher gave me an English name, which is Jeffrey. And then the reason that I changed that is because in my high school, there were only 3 Chinese students, and all of us were Japanese, and we all do cross countries. And I'm like, this doesn't make sense. So then I decided to change my life and start a new chapter after I graduated from high school in New York. And then finally, I decided to just go with my own name, Hao, right? So for me, I've done work like what Vanessa said, both actually New Year's Eve and The Chef we created together. And both short films meant a lot to me. For The Chef, obviously we're talking about human-robot relationship, but then we're also, talking about how our Asian experience, how us Asians in the U.S. experience, experience in this world of, like not many people understanding us. And the other project, which actually also meant a lot to me, is because we were at AFI, we have to make a film within 30 miles of the school, which means we have to make it in LA. But then I always wanted to make a story that's set in my own hometown in the Gobi Desert area in China. And then we were like, okay, the desert look kind of similar. So we decided to build, like my hometown family and that home in LA. And then we made a story totally in Mandarin and it's about, this kid who learns Kung Fu and then comes home and his family pretty much rejects him for doing that and how he tries to get that validation back. And for my current works, I'm currently working on two projects. One, it's set in China in Mandarin about blind soccer players. Kind of also how they trying to find their identity in this world where everyone, pretty much 95% of the blind population in China, they were forced to, their only career job is, to do massage, which is very strange. And so this group of people, they really wanted to break out from that. And my other work is based on my own high school experience where I went to a Catholic school in New York and I felt very lost there. And then I escaped. And the place that I felt probably closest to home will be Flushing. So I escaped to Flushing only to find that it's even more strange to me in my experience. So those are my works.
Thank you so much, Hao. And I'm looking forward to touching upon a few more of these experiences too throughout the rest of the panel. Let's go over to Mike. Do you want to tell a little bit more about the channel CantoMando, kind of how you guys all came together and
Sure.
what this means for you? Yeah.
Well, hello everybody. I'm Mike, and like Professor Huang said, I do YouTube and content creation for a living. And this is the first time I've worn a dress shirt in almost a year and a half. So I do not even know how to act in this. But like you said, I use we because I usually speak for the three of us. So we run a YouTube channel called CantoMando, which started I think about 3 years ago. And current projects that we're working on obviously does not sound as exciting as everybody else's here because we do weekly uploads. So we're constantly working and brainstorming new ideas. But some of the past works that I think is very important for today's discussion would be videos that we've created, such as quitting our jobs. So we've actually, when we took the jump to quit our traditional jobs, I was working in consulting at the time to do YouTube full time. We recorded the reaction with of our parents, like in that exact phone call. And I guess just exploring a lot of these taboo and cultural norms and attitudes is what we strive on, and is what we notice that a lot of people can relate to these experiences in particular. I think that sharing like our personal experiences in this raw and very amateur way opens the floor to a lot of crucial conversations and everything. So I'm very excited to speak today.
Thank you so much, Mike. And I can only imagine what it would be like to have to tell your parents that you're quitting a regular job. You're going to go out and be a content creator.
Yeah.
I'm sure they
And
looked
then
at you.
telling them that it's filmed. Yeah, the whole time. My mom was not happy about that. But yeah.
I can only imagine. I can only imagine. Thank you so much. Professor Fellers or Robert, would you mind?
It's a pleasure. First, let me just say it's a pleasure to be here. And as you had mentioned in my introduction, I'm really have two professional roles. One is as an administrator here at the University of Michigan, the Vice Provost and Chief Diversity Officer, and then another role as a longtime faculty member who's been interested in the concepts of race and ethnicity, particularly as it is played out and how it plays out here in the United States. Much of the work that I'm doing today in these days are really centered around my work as Chief Diversity Officer. We are here at the University of Michigan in the 5th year of a 5-year strategic plan which has at its goal a cultural transformation, really changing an institution that historically was pretty monoculture in terms of who it served, who the community is about, to really do some significant changes that'll result in the university being a place that not only values diverse perspectives, but really thrives on those diverse perspectives and creates a space where everyone has an opportunity to not only learn, but to also contribute and share and really interact effectively across our differences while also coming together around our similarities.
Thank you so much for that, Robert. And I can only imagine how important that is, especially in today's environment, right? We've seen a very tumultuous past couple of years, our world completely upended with the pandemic, the murder of George Floyd. It's been a real challenge. And at this time, it's great to have your leadership behind the university to really drive this forward and really embrace the diversity that we have here. That's definitely one of our greatest strengths here at University of Michigan.
Thank you.
And just to give a little bit more about myself, so I joined University of Michigan a few years ago. Typically, my research is around topics related to marketing. I'm a professor of marketing here. I study social networks and in particular how platform designs can create incentives for content creators and how they can therefore motivate content creation through these elements of platform design. That said, recently I've taken an interest to the discrimination that Asian Americans have faced through the course of the pandemic. So I have a project that's working with a number of other brilliant co-authors, both here at the University of Michigan and at other institutions. And we're looking at specifically in the early days in the wake of the pandemic, how were Asian Americans and Asian businesses affected by this onset? And of course, one of the things that we found so far is that Asian Americans, Asian businesses were hit a lot harder than other businesses. So really speaks to a lot of the important things that we're thinking about today. Excellent. So, if I could dive into our next question is around deconstructing identities. And, in this, a lot of us really lean on, we leverage our unique perspectives in our work, but, there's this question of, how do we describe ourselves? How do we express these identities? Which ones would we describe as core identities? And how are these really coming to life? How do they come into the art that we create on a regular basis? So we'll switch up the order a little bit, keep a little variety. Mike, would you mind kind of sharing a little bit first? What identities do you feel are core to you? How are those coming out in the content that you're creating on a, like you mentioned, a weekly basis?
Of course. I think when I first got this question and I was scrambling on Google, trying to find out what is this technical term, like what are core identities? And I started looking at myself. I'm like, wait, do I even know myself? But I think that at the core, I think that I am a 26-year-old male that is Asian Canadian, right? And I think that a lot of the YouTube work that we've done has evolved and helped me shape and find out who I am in the work. So what I mean by that is when we started doing YouTube, the goal was to kind of teach Chinese in comedic ways. We would have a skit and then we would teach a piece of Chinese after. And then we started learning the fact that we're not really good at Chinese, so we can't really teach it. So we moved on to doing more, challenges, just kind of learning Chinese with our audience as we move forward. Our goals definitely changed throughout the evolution of the channel. And then one of the biggest things that I think I realized throughout this process is that for me personally, it's constantly constantly discovering identity and is constantly changing. Although this is what I am at the core, I think that as I create more videos, I'm exposed to new things from the audience, and it's really helped me kind of be a little more adaptive instead of being. When I first came in, I was like, oh, this is how I am. I am an Asian American, and I need to play within this boundary. But as I've done YouTube more and more, I realized that mindset could kind of cage you in, and then not allow you to explore and think outside the box. Yeah, I think that's about it on my end in terms of, and like I said before, we express our identity very much in every video that we make out, that every video that comes out. I remember in the beginning processes, we would sit down and have an idea, and we would say, how can we add an Asian element to this? But I think that really came sometimes at the cost of the quality of the content. So representation comes in the form of indirect representation as well as direct representation. And I think that I think that it's not one is better than the other, but just being out there, speaking your language proudly and doing these things without having to stuff so many elements is also very helpful. Yeah.
Those are excellent points. Absolutely excellent points. And I love what you described about, your channel needing to adapt, and you kind of, really leaning into these different aspects of your identity over time. Definitely something I've noticed with online content creators is that there are a lot of audience trends, right? The media landscape is constantly shifting, and as a result, you need to kind of adapt, reinvent yourself in order to stay on top of that. So thank you so much for sharing that experience. I guess we'll transition on. Hao, would you like to talk a little bit about your identities? You mentioned a lot, moving from place to place, how those places were expressed in your works. Can you elaborate a little bit on those points?
Of course. Yeah, so that question has always been one of the most difficult questions to me, because like what I said earlier, so I was born in Gansu, China, which is around Gobi Desert area. And then at about 5 years old, my family moved to Guangzhou, which is pretty much the opposite. It's in the south of China. And I grew up there, at first not knowing how to speak Cantonese, and then trying to adapt to, the environment there. And then at the age of 15, I came to New York for high school. After that, I went to Boston for college, and then I went to LA for grad school, and then I worked there afterwards. And now, like currently, I'm in Beijing, China. So yeah, like I've been traveling around a lot, and at first I felt, like when I first came to the US, I felt, okay, the further I'm away from like where I was born, like that Gobi Desert area, the more I miss that place, and that the more I identify myself as, like that is my hometown. But then now that I've been to so many places and for so many years, after that I felt I'm kind of lost. Every time when people ask me, where are you from? I'm like, I really don't know how to answer that, because I don't see any place I'm not familiar with any place, especially now, after coming to the US for so long. I went back to China, and because there were like massive changes in China, right, in recent years, even like Guangzhou, where I supposed to, have a very clear memory of, it's totally different now. And I don't know places, I don't know streets, I don't know anything anymore. So for me, it's very hard to call where is home. But then after years from making films, especially, I think that's part of the reason why I'm making like content in so many different genres, right? Like I do things in sci-fi, in war, in like so many different things. It's kind of because, like in filmmaking, traveling like from world to world is kind of like my real life, and I'm always searching for that identity in those worlds. And I'm trying to have characters, explore those worlds for me. And, so I think that's one crucial part for me in terms of the theme of identity. And the other part is that, in China, I grew up in like a environment kind of, like filled with toxic masculinity, right? So I was trained to become this like alpha male from like when I was a kid, and I was not allowed to be even close to my like mother or my grandmother and any like female members in my home. And I cannot cry. Like when I first came to Guangzhou, I was bullied a lot in elementary school for not speaking Cantonese and for acting like like a mainlander. But then I couldn't talk about it to my father, and because he would think that you're weak, and you can't cry. And the only time that I can actually escape was at night when it's all dark, and I can finally imagine myself becoming like a superhero or somebody who can fly away or who has power, who is not really me in real life. And like from that escape, I've kind of felt empowered. But that identity, that question for me is also something that I'm trying to explore in my work right now, where like what is manhood, right? Like, and what is masculinity, and like what does it mean to be a man in this world, and like why can't men express like feelings, emotions, vulnerabilities, and those kind of questions. So
that's a really deep, really interesting statement, definitely. Do you feel like, you'd mentioned these pressures to potentially conform to a particular archetype, and how that's, almost like rebelled against in the individual in terms of, when they're faced with these pressures, then they want to almost fly away. Do you feel like any of your characters that you've created through your works, have any of them kind of embodied some of these feelings?
Yes, totally. I mean, okay. So the first reason I think for me to even do film was trying to, escape from, actually answering, kind of escaping from that question and escaping from who I am in a way. And I mean, at first I became an actor, right? Like I thought, like I look at the big screen and those actors are like warriors and those people, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna be those, and then I'm gonna feel empowered. But then reality is not like that. In my like 10 years of acting career, almost like all the roles that were given to me were like so pathetic. Like I'm always like homeless, and like I'm always in the orphan. I've been an orphan for like 4 times, and I'm just like, no, I can't do that anymore. This is not feeling empowering. So I'm like, okay, I need to move behind the scene. I need to create characters who can actually feel empowered. So yes, to answer your question, I do, like I do think, my characters in different genre, in different worlds, are pretty much exploring that same question that I wanted to explore in my real life.
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And should Marvel be listening in on this call, Hao is definitely still looking to fulfill that superhero role. Am I right? Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. Vanessa, I guess we'll move on to you in this case.
Yeah. Well, I definitely, like I really appreciate Mike and Hao's answer, and I really agree with Mike about how identity is ever changing. It's always changing, and I think I haven't even considered about what identity am I before I came here, because I feel like for 26 years when I was in China, I felt I didn't think about identity, like what is that? I was one of a billion, right? I didn't feel like I have one identity. But it only after I went abroad, I came to America, and I realized, oh, like I have to understand who I am. I have to understand what the world around me is like. So, and every project I've done, I think about this question always. So what I give myself, what I consider my identity to be now is a Chinese woman in her 30s who's married to a Jewish American man. The reason why I mentioned that, who I'm like my marriage is because I realized that identity, you're born with an identity, but you also given yourself identity, right? And I realized I'm a Chinese woman by birth, and I chose an international relationship, international marriage. So that is my identity, human woman, Chinese person, wife to a Jewish American man. Yeah, and I really understand, I feel like only in recent past year or so, I really understand what it means to be a, human woman. Being a writer myself, I start to think about, the scarcity of female perspectives in written words, just because of how women didn't have access to education, to be literate enough, and to have enough free time and space besides, family chores, just to write. And I realized that it's such a luxury to be a female writer. So that is something that I'm like, okay, this is my core identity. And I see how important it is for me to write more. It's kind of almost kind of catching up to, the male narrative over thousands of years. And that's one thing. And then, the other thing that I'm recently thinking, and it's pretty funny to me because my last name is Kong. It's the same name with the Chinese philosopher Confucius. And I'm actually from that area. My hometown is Shandong Qufu. That is my hometown, but I was born in Harbin in northeast China. But Shandong is where a lot of Shandong people migrated from Shandong in the early 19th century to Dongbei area. So I joke around because I recently, since I been in Hollywood and since I've been exploring my identity, I realized, oh, I'm a feminist, and my ancestor Confucius wasn't. So then there, as a female writer and the great granddaughter of Confucius, I feel like, okay, I have to complete his theory. I have to really recognize what is not, suitable for our society now. So yeah, that is my, Chinese, and, I'm a Chinese woman. That is my core identity.
Yeah, definitely. I thought that was absolutely fascinating, that point you made around the fact that some of the identities maybe we're born with, right? Sometimes maybe individuals will try to, or society will try to put you in a box, but some of the identities, like you mentioned, being married to a Jewish American man, some of them are chosen. Do you ever find that kind of coming out in the works that you create? Do you ever have characters that are kind of choosing to define themselves, perhaps through their actions?
Well, yeah, sure, because I think all of my work are like that. I feel like as a writer, you grow, you evolve with your character. Sometimes this is what I realized. I think to be a writer, you need to have you need to have self-awareness, and you need to have the awareness of your surroundings. And I feel like sometimes it only comes out when I'm writing. Like I wouldn't even know what I'm thinking until I write something, and I'm like, oh, this character does this. So maybe, then I see what my intentions were. I feel like it's a way to explore my own psyche, based on what I write. So yeah.
Definitely. That's absolutely fascinating. If I could ask you just one more interesting question. You'd mentioned that you wanted to write, deep female characters that kind of represent some of your experiences that, hadn't been written before. And I'm curious around what are some of the differences, right? What makes a female character, what makes them more organic, more real, and what was really missing in the past?
Yeah, that is a really good question. That is a really good question. I'll try to answer. I don't think I have a really good answer now, but I think I read a post somewhere was like you can check your characters to see if you're telling a story from a female perspective, or you're from the mainstream or the male gaze, you can check yourself. So it's like every character I write, I will check, do they have their own motive? Is it like separate from the society, separate from everybody else? It's like this female protagonist, do they have their own motive? Do they have their own awareness? Do they know what they're doing instead of what, the environment is telling them to do? And yeah, and especially water tossing boulders, this project, because we have a protagonist who is a Chinese woman in the 1920s trying to, tackle on the institution of racism. It's like 100 years ago. What was this woman thinking? I was like, I don't understand. I would be so scared, but at the same time, I have to think she knows what she's doing. She knows what she was doing 100 years ago doing this. So I was like, okay, I have to trust the character, that they know what they're doing, and put myself in the character. Yeah.
That's absolutely fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. I can't imagine, right? Can't imagine kind of putting myself in the shoes of someone that lived 100 years ago. And I can only imagine the amount of research, the amount of dedication that goes into when you're considering, like, what is this person thinking? What are they feeling right now? What should their environment look like, right? It's absolutely fascinating. Robert, I kind of want to touch with you a little bit in terms of, there's been a lot of push for more representation, to have more, for example, more diverse individuals in these positions of power, either whether that's writing, whether that's leading organizations. I guess, can you speak a little bit to, what is the importance there? What should the audience take away in terms of why it's so crucial to have these diverse voices in the room when these decisions get made?
So I think Vanessa had really put her finger on it, in the sense that I think of it in the context of point of view. So the difference between seeing the world through the eyes, in this case, in Vanessa's point, from a woman, not the woman, because there is no single women's perspective, no single Asian American perspective, single Chinese perspective, but from a woman, i.e. humanizing the person and telling the story from that perspective. And so if you don't have individuals who are coming from various experiences, various cultures, various identities, you end up with people writing in a way that really describes what they think it is, but not what it is. And usually when you write from that perspective, you're not writing from a human perspective. So for instance, one of the things that we find in psychology is you often have people wanting, out of the goodness of their heart, to have empathy. And based on that empathy and based on their perspective, they end up missing the story. So they see an individual, for example, with a big scar on their face. And from the outside looking in, all you see is that scar. And you think, oh my gosh, how difficult it must be to have that scar. And oh my gosh, I feel bad for you in that particular context, because I know people have bullied you in that context. And that's all you see is the scar. And even when you're well-intended, you have defined the person from your interpretation of what that scar is. So that scar could be something that the person is really, really proud of. They got it saving a little child in a burning fire. The scar may be something that they're really proud of because it's their I was gonna say BS detector. It's their way to determine who actually cares about them versus those who are there. Or I never even think about the scar. Scar happened when I was 5. I don't see myself in the scar. But you miss the point of view when you end up having other people telling other people's story. And when you do that, you end up with stereotypes. You end up with very shallow characters. And you end up dehumanizing the people that you're actually trying to provide representation. So it's not just having Asian faces or women faces or Black faces in the story, but it really has to be about the point of view and recognizing that there is many different point of views as there are many different people within their particular identity. And I think, again, the three of you just talked about 3 very different experiences in the way in which you've experienced the world. And there's as many different of those stories as there are people. And so I think that's why it's critical for us to have greater representation in all forms of media and telling different stories from the perspectives of individuals, so that we see both the distinctive experiences as well as the common experiences that are just common human common experiences.
That's beautifully stated. Thank you so much, Robert. Really appreciate that. I think that transitions really well into our next topic. You'd mentioned that there is this push, there's this recognition that we need more diverse faces behind the screen or on the screen. And I think this connects very well with the broader media trends. We've seen a lot of evolution of the media landscape over the past few years. And we can think about how this creates both positive opportunities as well as potentially limits individuals that might feel like they're getting boxed in because of their identities as a result of this. So, I'd like to take a little bit of time and think about, how have these media trends, whether that's COVID hitting, whether that's, perhaps the popularity of Crazy Rich Asians as being one of the most recent and one of the most successful Asian American films. How have these broader changes, how are the changes in the landscape, how has that affected your content creation? And I think we can start off with Vanessa.
Yeah, how does the landscape affect my, my content creation? I feel, because I've been here only for 5 years, and the first year, 2016, was when Trump was elected. I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't understand what that meant. I remember it was a really sad day, but I don't have any, like, I don't know what the landscape was like before 2016. So I do feel like there is an uprise of minorities in Hollywood, of course, for over the past 5 years. And everybody has been telling me, like, China has a big market, you're just in the right time, everything is, on the rising. So yeah, I feel like there's a lot of positive representation I've seen over the past few years. But we're talking about, like, there's also negative impacts, because of especially the pandemic and all these racism. These representations stir up lots of bigotry, and and then I see people get into, like, two different kind of mentality. One is this modern minority myth. It's like, if you keep your head down, you get over this. But as I was writing Water Tossing Boulders, I was literally writing about stories happened 100 years ago, and people say the same thing: just keep your head down, it'll be fine. I'm like, no, it's not fine. I'm from 2021. I'm telling you, it's not fine. And then it's this this nationalism tendency. It's like, it's in the response to the trauma caused by white colonialism in China. Like, we all read the history from 200 years ago. And people are just like, especially outside of the United States, they're like, we're just gonna be patriotic. It's the same thing. It's almost as crazy as the white supremacy here. So yeah, it's definitely a lot has changed and a lot is happening. Yeah, I guess that's my point.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that underscores the importance of some of the projects that you're working on too, right? The more we can kind of remember history, the more we can draw parallels to what's going on today, the more that we could potentially learn from these lessons and then perhaps, hopefully, not walk into the same mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. Hao, I guess if we transition on to you, I know that you'd mentioned in our earlier meetings too, kind of feeling boxed in at times as well with this increase in representation. Can you kind of share some of your perspective as a director in terms of how opportunities opened up, and also potentially how those opportunities potentially boxed you in?
Right. So definitely. So from Crazy Rich Asian, which is commercially success film, to more, I guess, intimate and more personal films like Minari this year. I think we're definitely seeing a very good sign of Asian representation in Hollywood. But then and I mean, also I do feel like I've been getting a lot of opportunities because of that. I think before Crazy Rich Asian, like, I definitely see that big change from not being recognized, not being able to have opportunities, to finally people come to to me and asking me to send them, you know, my stuff, and that they're starting to have that interest in me, in the stories that I'm trying to tell. But then what I realized though is that, you know, I'm starting to kind of become one part of a brand now, where, when people, especially Hollywood executives, when they have like general meetings with me, they will just automatically assume that I will be just creating, you know, content about Asian, people trying to find identity in the US. But, you know, for example, the project that I'm working on in New York, it's called "And So We Call Each Other Love," and the core story of that is a love story, and it's also about identity, but then it's more about the identity of what is love. Is it a love, or is it like a companionship, or like what do we, you know, it's more like loneliness and companionship story. But then when we pitched it, just because it has a Chinese lead, and then people would just say that, oh wow, this is amazing because, you know, it's about like this Chinese guy in the US, you know, trying to find love. Oh wow, like that totally fits, you know, what we're trying to do here, like trying to, you know, have the Asian voice being heard. And for me, that's bothering, because that's not the core of the story. Yeah.
No, that's really fascinating. Those are very interesting points too. I guess transitioning onwards, Mike, you know, I imagine that the media trends that are affecting you, in some ways that there are some common threads with traditional media. In other cases, you might be, you know, latching onto more social media trends, probably aiming for a younger demographic in terms of your audience than potentially Hao and Vanessa. Can you speak a little bit to, you know, some of the trends that you're seeing and kind of how do you stay on top of them?
Sure. I think that with the proliferation of social media in the past like decade or so, it has given a lot of people that didn't have a voice a chance to be heard. And I think that especially in YouTube, some names that pop up to the top of my head would be like Wang Fu, JK, or a lot of these other YouTubers that kind of put themselves out there to help us, to let us know that it's possible. I think that also created a very big sense of communities and these small communities coming together. And I think that community is extremely powerful, because a channel is essentially a community of people that believes in the same things. And we have now these micro niche communities that are very specific, right? But I think that I also really resonate to Hao's point, where he talks about the fact that when you create, like, you want to do Asian representation, but sometimes it's twisted in a way that's the only thing you can do, and that is extremely suffocating as a content creator as well. I think I was talking to a YouTuber a year back, and then we were all talking about, this was an Asian creator event, and then he was talking about, he raised a really interesting point, where is like, if you're somebody that's a minority in a position of power, you almost have this sticker slapped on you saying that I bear the responsibility of representing everybody now, right? So the question is, if they choose not to be super outright with the representation, is that doing harm to the community? And it was just an open-ended question, and which really made me think is, if they choose personally not to be outright talking about representation, them in that position and doing things and being successful at it is a form of representation in itself, right? So yeah, I think that, going back to the point, I think that the social media landscape has definitely increased minority visibility, but there are still some negatives and drawbacks as well.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned the point around, you know, really forming a community and the power of social media. I think one of the upsides of these algorithms that now are driving a lot of the content creation, you know, you think about, you know, in the traditional world, you would have much more like big budget film releases, right? And therefore, any sort of content that's going to be produced with a large budget needs to appeal to a broad number of individuals. Now you have these recommendation systems. These recommendation systems, they're based on your previous watch history, other things that you've liked. And now you can very much micro-target your content and make sure that, for example, Mike as a content creator, he can reach the people that are specifically interested in the content that he creates. And therefore it can really allow this content to thrive in ways that it didn't before. I think, I'm sure Hao and Vanessa are feeling a little bit of this as well, in terms of, we're seeing a lot more of these kind of small platforms kind of pop up. And through these small platforms, you can, again, target this content at a much more interested audience, right? And therefore speak a lot more to their specific story as opposed to trying to, be everything to everyone, which sometimes can be a bit of a fool's errand. So I love the fact that you touched upon that point. I also wanted to, bring this over to Robert, and I'm very curious about this idea of, what advice would you give to someone that feels this burden to kind of represent the entire group, or put differently, how as institutions, how can we potentially minimize this burden, right? How can we potentially allow these individuals that are in positions of power, that are minorities, how can we allow them to represent themselves and not feel like they always have to represent others at the same time?
I like the way you put the second part of that question. What can we do as institutions? I think first, and I always come back to this, is to see people as human and as having many different identities, and across different identities, wanting to connect. So there may be times when, I'll just speak for myself, there are times when I want to connect as an African American. And tell the story of African Americans and talk about it. And that's who I'm looking for. Other times I want to talk about what it's like to be a man. And then still other times what it's like to be a tall man, or a tall person. And so I think we have arrived when we're allowed to tell, from a media standpoint, when we're allowed to tell a story that has nothing to do with our identity as a member of our ethnic identity or our racial identity, and it still be seen and valued as a human story, because we're now sharing the fact that I love, I laugh, I cry, I cut my grass, I stub my toe, and all of those are human stories. And unfortunately, in this society, rarely do minorities get to tell that story. If you think in the majority cultures, you're able to tell all kinds of different stories, and you never have to worry, am I white in America? Did I tell a white story? No, I just told a story. But when you're a member of an ethnic minority or LGBTQ or a woman or any group that traditionally has not had power, that story, by definition, if you get to tell it, becomes that story, the story of that particular group. And that's the part that I'm hearing from both Mike and Hao, is the suffocating. So yeah, I want to be able to tell a story about what it's like to, my story, what it was like to be Chinese growing up in America or in Canada. But I also want to be able to tell a story about what it's like to fall in love, or what it's like to learn something new over one's life that has nothing to do with race, or a little bit to do with race, but not everything. And that's the challenge, is when we can get beyond being seen as representation, and we can get beyond just being seen as suitable for one community to consume in terms of our media, then we've actually gotten there. Then we've actually have made it. But we still have a long way to go in our society. We still get labeled in ways that aren't always the way that we see ourselves at those moments, or in those projects, or in those conversations, if it's social media.
I love those points. I really do. And that makes me think a lot more about these, and I come back to these recommendation systems. I come back to these segregated kind of ecosystems of content creation and content consumption. Have you ever thought about, or do you ever worry that, because individuals are being recommended content that appeals to their tastes, that they're perhaps not getting as broad of a perspective as they did otherwise? This could be a concern with just the video content that you consume. It could also be a concern for our political discourse in this country, whereby, and we've seen this over the past couple of years, you have two sides of the political aisle, and it seems like they're living in completely different realities. I don't know if you have any thoughts around this particular point.
I absolutely think, I think in America, you saw that on January 6th. You saw the culmination of it, and you see how now, 2 months or a month and a half, 2 months since, there are all these different stories about what happened. There are two very different stories, and depending on which story you believe, you can easily have it reinforced and never, ever have to have a conversation that challenges your reality, that challenges the assumptions that you had to begin with. And that is not only dangerous from a broader political perspective, I think it's also dangerous for, again, us as people to be able to move forward. Because if you can't learn from varying perspectives, if you're only in your echo chamber, then we can't go forward. You don't get new ideas from hearing the same thing over and over again.
Definitely. And I think, that point speaks to the importance of this panel. That point speaks to the importance of the Michigan China Forum as well, right? To facilitate this cross-cultural dialogue, to bring people with very diverse viewpoints together and allow them to kind of talk on a common ground, speak respectively on these issues, right? And the more we can kind of agree on a common reality, the more we can, like you mentioned, Robert, recognize each other's humanity, the better we can potentially make decisions that are good for all of us, right? So I love those points. I'd mentioned the audience a little bit, and I want to kind of turn this a little bit on its head in the sense that all of you guys are content creators, but you guys are also content consumers too. And I want to kind of ask you guys, have you, as a consumer of media content, experienced any shifts in the way that you experience and perceive media? Have you been influenced by the media that you consume? And how has that influence been expressed in either your daily lives or even repackaged and made into the works that you create on a regular basis? I guess we'll start with Mike on this one, in terms of your media consumption habits and kind of how that shaped you.
I think one of the biggest things when you're behind the screens than when you're in front of the screens is that because nowadays we have a blast of content being pushed at us. You can see that with Facebook, then it's Instagram, and now it's TikTok, which is literally 7-second videos and on to the next. People get really comfortable as a consumer of voicing their ideas and not attaching a person behind it. So you're essentially able to say anything you like, whatever you want to say, even though it might not be true, whether it's out of ill intent, good intent, just to get a laugh, and it's put on there forever. But you don't have any consequences attached to your actions, right? So I think that being on the receiving end of it, having comments come in that were, like a bit hurtful, because on YouTube, you filter through all the comments, you realize that there is a person behind the content that you're watching. There is somebody that is, attempting to do something that they're being expressive. And although you might disagree with those points, the way that people have done it now is very much, I feel like, without consequence. I could just blurt my opinion out and I could just put you down. But that's one thing I personally try to be more mindful of now, being on the opposite side of the screen, is whenever I leave a comment where I choose to engage with a piece of content, I'm always very mindful into thinking, how does this affect the creator itself? So I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, and I absolutely love that. And I've definitely heard that from a number of other content creators too. I guess, if there are any members of our audience that are also looking to create their own content, that are looking to kind of start up and get into the space, would you have any advice from them in terms of kind of how you filter out the good feedback from the bad? How do you kind of discern, if a lot of people are making negative remarks, how do you think about, all right, does this mean I should necessarily change my content, or should I write off these individuals as potentially being quote unquote haters? How do you filter through that? And I guess, how do you also manage your own, like you mentioned, a lot of mean comments, a lot of just very, talk is cheap on the internet. How do you manage your own well-being throughout this process?
That's a good question. I think that I can only speak from personal experience, and it's something that I take a lot of things that are negative, and I don't read their. If they're doing something explicitly trying to get a reaction out of you, you could kind of read that. But for me, it's more so if there's enough people that are engaging with my content and they get a lot of likes and a lot of people agree with that piece of opinion, then I would say that's valid, and then I would read into it a little bit. But if it's something that is a one-off comment, I would take it more so as a compliment that like there's somebody out there expanding that energy to comment on my thing and express all these emotions. And I think that in this game is like you really have to have a degree of tough skin, and kind of filter throughout those comments. Yeah.
Definitely. If I could ask just one more kind of follow-up to that, have you ever had a time where like the audience agreed, maybe in the comments, maybe somewhere else, and they were telling you, you're wrong or you shouldn't be doing this, and you said, no, I'm going to do this anyways, right? This is important for my own creative efforts. I think this is an important point that I just want to express, maybe for myself. And you said, no, I'm going to make this content anyways, even though it's getting some negative reaction.
Yeah. The best example I could find for that would be, I think there was a point in time where our channel was doing really poorly. And I think part of it was that we were so caught up with this idea of getting as many views as possible that we didn't look at what our audience wanted or any of that. So the biggest thing in that case would be transparency. You should be working with your audience and your followers rather than working against them. So open up that conversation. So what we did is we put out a video where we were like, hey, this is what we're feeling. This is what we're going through. We're not as passionate making the same level of content as we are before. We feel really disconnected from our fans and you guys. What can we do? Right. So opening the floor up to that conversation, although it's a little bit uncomfortable to have, really helped us personally through that. So
fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing, Mike. Hao, if I could, direct you a lot of the similar questions, thinking about you consuming content, you know what it's like to be behind the screen, right? You know what it is. You know all the bells and whistles and kind of like the creative tricks that they're putting in. Kind of, how has that influenced the way that you consume content? And how do you kind of pick through? All right, I want to incorporate some elements of this. How do you reincorporate that into your own directing? How does that inspire your work?
I think there are a couple shifts that I found myself now than before I was a filmmaker, where because filmmaking, if you're in the filmmaking world, you will know that it's so difficult, and literally every film set something will go wrong, and something that's just like a curse. But then so like so now that I understand how hard it is to, make that content, when I see films, even if it's something that I don't like, I would be like, well, they work hard. but then, there are times though, like I started to recognize things that, from certain, when I'm watching content, like sometimes you will see things that, oh, like, this is interesting, this is unique, and it doesn't, especially those points that doesn't speak to a broad audience, and probably doesn't really help the work to be, let's say to win an award or to get a good box office. But then those are something that, I would start thinking, okay, why then the content creator, still decided to use that? Because I had similar experiences in that, like in both New Year's Eve and The Chef, like there are points that, because for films, you always get this like reviews, like even before you make the film, right? Like when you have a script, you have people, you know, giving you notes, and then after you do your cut, there are like test screenings, and there are audiences giving you ratings and stuff. But then, so like there are points that, you know, like that doesn't speak to almost most of the audience, but then for you, it's very personal. And then for you, that's very core. Then, you know, as the, you know, like you, now that you have the power to be that creator, you can decide to keep it, right? For example, like the ending of The Chef, a lot of people don't like it. A lot of people think that, you know, it's like strange, and then it just cut out like immediately. But then for us, it's very important, you know, to have that ending, because we wanted to show how, you know, like no matter you're a robot or a human, you're still under the umbrella of the society where you are feeling suffocating, and you don't have power to go against that big umbrella. So yeah, so for me, like when I'm seeing content right now, I feel like I think a lot more about, you know, like the choices that the creators made. Yeah.
Do you think, and this is just a curiosity of mine, do you feel like the fact that you have directed so many films, do you feel like that has increased your enjoyment of these works? Or does the fact that you can kind of like see how the sausage is made, the fact that you can see through it, has that diminished it somewhat? Has that removed some of the, you could say, some of the magic of theater, so to speak?
Well, like I do think, you know, like so what's different now than before is that, you know, before when you see a good film, you're just like, oh, this is good, but I don't know why. But then now you see why, and then, you know, like you see the craft behind the creation. I guess now the fun for me then is like trying to capture, you know, what makes it like work, and why is it so good from, like from those crafts, and that's still very fun to me. So
Definitely. If I could ask you maybe one final question, you know, Mike mentioned audience pushback, but you, in your case, you have audience pushback, which might be different from producer pushback, right? Because they're interested in maybe the more financial perspective versus like reviewer or critical pushback, which again is a very different audience. Kind of how do you balance the three of those? What happens if, you know, the producer says, I love this, the audience doesn't, the reviewers like it, but the audience doesn't? How do you balance these competing voices in your creative process?
I mean, for me, I see producers or like the audience or the critiques kind of equally, like, and then like to what Mike just said, you need to balance it, right? Like it's more like what you believe, and to balance what you believe, and if it actually speaks to, you know, your audience, and your audience includes your producer, and you know, like sometimes, you know, if like the worst scenario will be like, you know, you have a group of filmmakers together, you're making a film, and you take notes from everyone, and like, and then everyone have an idea, and then you make sure you have everyone's idea, then what is that film, you know? So yeah, I think you definitely need to, I mean, I'm still learning, you know, to trying to balance that.
Yeah, definitely. You wouldn't want your work to be this kind of amalgamation, right, of everyone's various ideas, and then it's just like a Frankenstein. It doesn't work with itself. You know, and I love that point too, in terms of, you know, kind of finding your own voice as well. There's a quote that I share in my marketing class, and it comes from Henry T. Ford, the inventor of the Model T Ford, and you know, he says, if I had asked everyone what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse. Right, so when he was inventing the first automotive vehicle, everyone's like, yeah, oh, I just want my horses to go faster. So sometimes, you know, and this is also a common statement, the audience is very good at potentially identifying that something is wrong, but they're not always the best at really pointing to what the good solution would be for this challenge. So I love these points that you guys are making. Vanessa, we'll round out with you in terms of, you know, what is the content that you consume? What are the influences that you have, and how are those influences kind of reflected in the scripts that you create?
Yeah, I really appreciate Mike and Hao's answer. I'm just still thinking about it because first of all, like really commend to Mike being a YouTuber, like having those quick feedbacks and having to read comments. I've stopped reading comment section like since last year. I'm just like, I'm done with this. I can't, and I can't imagine being a YouTuber having to push out content every week and having to read the feedback. And I did so I did my AFI graduation speech in 2018, and because I kind of use it as my stand-up set, so I make jokes in my speech, and then because I came from a translation background, so I translated into Chinese and we posted, and we got 20 million views in China. And it's a large number, right? But as I tell my American friends, it's just a city population. Beijing has 20 million people alone. But I look at the comment section on YouTube video, I'm like, oh my God, like I can't believe how misogynistic it is, and in both languages. When you can read both languages, you get all the hatred, and it's like, oh my God, that's too much. So what I experienced, the shift in social media as a audience, I definitely feel like right now social media has consumed our life, especially since the lockdown in 2020, because we have nowhere to go, right? We have nowhere to go, and there's so many blasts of contents, like Mike said, and then I'm like, what am I choosing, right? And I also realized that a lot of people use, like, just like Mike said, like a lot of people use social media as a way, they don't have consequences, and they say things seemingly true, but it's not true. And I realized that I, have to really recognize my own emotions as I look at different comments and news, and especially, news are also biased, right? And then I have to realize how my emotion is, affected by the news or by the headlines or by the comments, and I recognize that, okay, this is not how it's supposed to be. I shouldn't use social media as a truth guide. Like, I shouldn't be looking at it constantly and thinking this is what the world is. So I guess my shift, since last year, is to kind of keep a distance from too much social media. And yeah, and as a screenwriter, like Hao said, I think that's the perks of doing film, even though it's such pain to make, but I wouldn't hear, the comments until 3 years later, at least, when it's made and shown, and then people started criticizing it. This is like what I did 5 years ago. I'm like, okay, I'm too far away from this to be hurt by this, But yeah, and I agree with Hao, is that in especially in screenwriting, is that you can't listen to too many voices. And especially as a Chinese woman, I feel like Chinese children all know this. Like, we listen to all advices. We have so many doctrines and rules to follow, throughout, especially as a woman, what you should do, what you should write. And all I learned after I grown as an adult is to unlearn this, is to, like, I don't need to listen to this. I don't need to listen to this. And it takes years of unlearning of that doctrine, So yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
I love that advice, and I think that's advice that we could all take a little bit more, right? Maybe distance ourselves from social media. Not Mike's channel. Keep watching Mike's channel, but distance ourselves from social media a little bit. I did want to follow up, though, on one point that you made. This is an absolutely fascinating one. You mentioned being able to read comments that are coming in Chinese as well as in English. And the world is becoming a pretty divided place. You have very different perspectives on each side of the Pacific. When you're making content, how do you think about, will this content appeal to Chinese? Will they appeal to more Americans? Will it appeal to Chinese Americans? Kind of how do you balance these audiences when their perspectives potentially are diverging?
Right. It's a really good question, because that's what I think all the time. And one thing I realized is no matter what I create or me and my team create, there will be criticism, no matter what. So first of all is to be prepared for that. And second is when you create, of course, you have to consider all the parties at hand. You don't want to hurt people's feelings. And I meant in a way that you don't want to trigger the traumas in a really unnecessary way. So we, when we were creating Water Tossing Boulders, my director and I talked extensively about how we are portraying different races, how we are portraying the tension, how we can tell the story that can lift everybody without, triggering anybody, right? That's a really difficult thing to do. And I don't think anybody can get it 100% right. But the best we can do is to really dig deep in our heart, make sure our intentions is good, and make sure that we consider, as well, that's where you ask for advice. When I say don't ask for advice, it's like, first of all, you know what you're doing, but then you created something and you send it to, the parties, like, for example, our story has, like different races in that society. So we have to give it to different people. It's like, read this and see how you feel and tell us what we can do better, right? Yeah, it's a process. And I think we can't be thinking about getting it right, because I don't think there's one answer, a right answer to these problems. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I guess, just to leave you with maybe one last point, do you feel that potentially Chinese audiences are becoming more interested in Chinese American stories? Do you think that there's maybe a greater awareness of what some of the early Chinese that came to the United States might have experienced? And do you find that there's a significant interest in consuming these works, or is it meant more for an American domestic audience?
I think for the time being, it definitely meant more to the Asian American audience, because we've all seen what Crazy Rich Asian didn't do well in Chinese market, and The Farewell, which I personally really love because I'm also from northeast China, but it didn't do well in China as well. Yeah, so that is I'm 31-year-old this year, right? I was born in '89. I was born in a really crucial time. And I always feel like my generation starts to mature now. If I'm here, I know there are people like me, right? From mainland China. I know I have friends who are writers here. We're doing the work and we are hoping to change the landscape. But at the moment, I don't, the past year, those two films didn't do well in Chinese market.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Robert, I just wanted to touch base with you on, one point, and that point was, specifically around potentially triggering an audience, but also wanting to talk about these very sensitive topics. Right. So on one hand, mentioning these past traumas, it can be very hard for individuals, especially if they're not prepared to be going into this conversation. On the other hand, there might be some value in, well, I'm sure there's some value in really remembering these moments and learning from them. So do you have any perspectives in terms of, what's the best way to potentially present this sensitive content to an audience? How could you maybe prepare them for it? Is there a way that you could frame it that'll be a little bit less jarring for them? Do you have any thoughts there?
I'm sorry, Justin. Yeah, no, I think I resonate to something that Vanessa said in terms of you don't want to exploit pain. You don't want to exploit the history just for pain's sake. As a non-artist, I probably shouldn't say this, though I do think an artist also has a responsibility to tell the truth. And sometimes you can't tell the truth without telling the pain. And also in that pain often comes education, particularly when you're dealing with content that may or may not be known across generations, let alone across cultures, across groups. And so I think you're absolutely right, Vanessa, the need to balance the value of telling the truth without being exploitive with respect to individuals' emotions. And it's also, fundamentally a personal choice in terms of what the storyteller, what the artist decides is there. And I think that goes back to the larger question, where I think it's important for a good artist to understand the audience, but not to have the audience direct the voice. That's the beauty of being an artist, is it's your interpretation of what's happening in the world. And if it's a conversation, it's important, any good conversation, one's listening, but not always agreeing. And so that conversation with the audience means you have to have some touch, be in touch with the audience, while at the same point in time, being clear about what it is that you have to say in that conversation.
Thank you so much, Robert. That was excellent. I think this segues into our next question pretty well in terms of, all of us, well, not all of us, but you guys are content creators, and, we're thinking about the impacts of the content that we create on the broader society. And of course, this is especially crucial because there were the killings that happened just earlier this week, really underscores the importance of humanizing Asians and telling these stories. What have you seen in terms of some of the impacts of your work? How have you been impacted by works that you have consumed? We can start this one off with actually maybe Vanessa.
Yeah. Do you mind frame the question again? Because I'm thinking about.
What have you seen some real world impacts? Have you had maybe fans coming up to you and telling you about how your work or your content has influenced them? And how do you think about, kind of how the stories that you tell are influencing the broader society?
Yeah, well, I definitely have a lot of, because I think because the only two work that has shown are my two thesis films. The other are scripts that I've been working on. Honestly, they haven't been shown, haven't been produced. So I can only speak from, after The Chef won so many awards, I definitely feel like a lot of people came to me, young people, young filmmakers, and came to us and said, you really inspired us to create, Asian protagonists, to create stories in Hollywood. And also after I did that commencement speech, a lot of young kids come to me and they say, oh, you show us that we can also do this, right? We can also be making film and be a screenwriter or just be a writer. That's like the positive experience I had.
That's excellent. That's excellent. Yeah, I can only imagine, with your speech ended up going viral and being seen by so many individuals. Maybe it is even the case that a lot of the impacts that you've had, you might not realize until farther down the line. And that's really powerful.
Yeah. And also, I really love comedy. So I try to do more open mics, and I feel like comedy is such a way, or humor is such a way to break the ice, to bring more people in the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I would like to highlight there that even if it doesn't need to be that every single piece of content is changing someone's life, right? Even if it's done as much as just making them laugh, brightened up their day, making them think about something that they wouldn't have otherwise, right? That is real world impact. It's small, it's difficult to measure, but you've affected a large number of people, and that's really making some changes here. I love that. I guess, continuing on, Mike, have you thought a little bit about some of the impacts of your channel? Have you seen any of those impacts?
Sure. I think I remember two distinct instances. I think one of them, we were out and somebody came up to us and asked if we were CantoMando, and we made YouTube videos, and then they were referring to a video that we did, which was a challenge where we guess. We are all Chinese, by the way, so we guess different Shanghainese words. So we would take different dialects from all over China and try to guess what they mean, because it sounds quite different in understanding. And then she was like, oh my God, I have never seen a video where my dialect is being used, and she was so excited. And then that was it felt really great. It felt amazing. It felt way better than there was a time where we were just looking at views and just oh, can we get 1 million views? Can we get 500,000 views? But it genuinely felt really good on the inside to see that impact and have somebody come up to us and thank us. And so that moment I remember very vividly. And the other thing that this is more of a general comment, whenever somebody that is not ethnically Chinese or Asian come up to us and say something like, wow, you made me want to learn more about the culture, it actually hits home very deep, because it makes me feel as if we are actually being able to spread the culture, and cultural awareness and everything like that. So that has always been an amazing feeling. So whether it's an email or somebody coming up to us and just really saying, oh, you really made me want to learn Chinese or discover this. So yeah, I think that for us, we definitely we have people, I don't want to say people come up to us all the time, right? But we have people here and there come up to us, and it's always a great conversation. And it's particularly, it's the reason why we continue to do what we do, aside from everything else, is just have this direct human impact. And yeah.
I imagine that you'll see even more individuals coming up to you as your channel grows, and especially as we move out of this pandemic. So yeah, being a YouTuber, like your face is a lot more public potentially than Vanessa's or Hao's. So
Yeah.
best get used to it, so to speak.
Thank you.
But no, that's absolutely fascinating. And so I researched your channel a little bit in just preparing for this panel. And one of the things that I really appreciated was how much you showed off the diversity that exists in China. And I remember, growing up here in the United States, we were mainly exposed to, a lot of, for example, Cantonese cuisine, right? Cantonese cuisine was like the most common cuisine that was available throughout the United States. People thought that, Chinese food meant chow mein, right? And that was the food that they typically associated with it. And now that we see more waves of Chinese immigrants coming in, we see a lot more diversity in the food and the languages that are represented amongst the Chinese. And I think your channel is doing great work in showing off these different regions, either different cuisines, different languages, really showing off that diversity. So thank you for that. Hao, I would try and direct you the same question here in terms of what are you thinking about when you think about the offline impacts? How does your work potentially affect people, affect dialogues, affect your audience?
I think similar to what Vanessa said. So after the chef, and after the chef, so there were people like coming to us saying, like, okay, so this is possible now. And also because I decided to, so after I graduated from graduate school, I decided to stay in LA, and then I participated in some of those programs at studios, like the Disney program and the HBO TV directing program. And I think that also, like some of my friends will come to me saying that, oh, like, so that's also possible, because for most, I would say, like, for most of, because I was doubting myself as well before, like I will be like, should I stay in the US? Would I even have a place here? Especially, actually, the TV world is very different from the film world, right? And the TV world is even more dominated by like white male directors, right? So would I have a voice, right? So I guess like they see the possibility of that, but then, like, kind of going back a little bit to what Vanessa was mentioning before, I do see a difference between how people in China and people in the US get impacted from, let's say, like my work. Like when I show the chef in China, in Japan, in like the US, the audience reaction is totally different. In the US, people actually recognize the the minority and the representation theme layered underneath the robot-human relationship. But then in China, nobody cares about it, right? Like, people are only saying like, oh, like this guy is making a sci-fi, right? And it's commercial, and it's like character driven, right? It has emotion, but it's in sci-fi world. But no one is really seeing, that layer of like representation, because in China, again, like it's not that diverse in terms of like, you know, racial diversity. So you know, from that, it's kind of like, so people's reaction kind of also impacted me in terms of, you know, where do I want to take the story, like, because we were talking about, you know, like making the feature version of the chef, but then in China, where there are a lot of money, there are a lot of investments, but then they will be saying things like, you know, if we want to make this feature, then we need to change the Caucasian actor, the robot, into Chinese. So it has to be an all Chinese, you know, film, which pretty much killed the entire layer of that, you know, representation theme. So that's why right now we're still trying to, you know, make that in the US.
Mhm, mhm. So I love, you brought up a couple of different dichotomies there, right? The funding dichotomy in China versus the United States. Would you say broadly, for some of these works, it's easier for you? And is this because because you're Asian, therefore it's easier to get funding over there? Is it that there's just more support for these kinds of maybe sci-fi genre works? Where are those differences coming from in this case?
Well, the difference is mainly, I do think China, like in terms of the film industry in China, it's very, very young. And like recent years, they started to, you know, grow, and they started to see the potential. Even though economically it's not doing really great, the film industry, but then like creatively, pretty much all the studios right now in China are looking for young filmmakers, which I feel is not happening in the US, right? Like nobody gives a first-time director the opportunity in the US, but in China people do. And thanks to some of the previous creators who were first-time filmmakers, and they did amazing job, and they proved their value in both the creative the creative you know, the circle, and the you know, like economic box office, so that now we have a lot of opportunities in China. But the other thing though is that they only found obviously Chinese content, right? And going back to what Vanessa was saying, that what about Asian American content? I don't think they're interested. And even like the content that I'm making in New York, like it's a Chinese guy, it's not like a Chinese American, it's a Chinese guy in the US falling in love. I think, like, you know, like in China, not many people will be funding that. So yeah, so that's the difference. And in Hollywood, I feel it's much difficult for young filmmakers and first-time filmmakers to be recognized.
Excellent. I think we're running into the end of just our panel portion. We're going to move into Q&A, and we have Q&A that's scheduled from around 9:40 Eastern time till 10 p.m. Eastern time. So we'll do about 20 minutes of it. I also see some excellent questions being populated in the chat. So very excited to get to these. But I guess, kind of before we go, do we have any last remarks? Anything that we want our audiences to take away from this panel, kind of any takeaways about your own work, or anything else that you'd like to share? And we can go in almost any order. Would anyone like to go first?
I can go. So I felt like it's pretty much literally what I'm feeling right now, and I wanted to share with, I guess, everyone that it is totally okay to feel lost about, who you are. And I felt like we're always asking that question. And when we see a film, something touches us, actually will educate us about who we are. And like when we go to like a new environment, when you go to a new school, when you have a new job, you are always meeting new people, new environment, and you will always feel lost, and you will always, trying to define who you are. And I think, the magical and the very exciting part of it is that journey of exploring, right? And I think we should recognize that journey, and we should embrace that journey.
Definitely. So I can share one important takeaway, and what I would take away from this is that we are living in a very challenging time. Thank you so much, Hao, for sharing those feelings of lostness and really embracing lostness. I'm sure a lot of us are feeling lost kind of with all the things that are going on in the world right now. But like Robert has definitely mentioned throughout all this, it's important to recognize our shared humanity throughout this entire process. It's important to have a diverse representation of voices. And that's why the work that all of you guys are doing is so important throughout this. It's important that we foster the shared understanding, because the more we understand each other, the more we recognize each other as human, the more we can potentially come together and make a better world for all of us. All right.
Well said.
Thank you. Thank you. If there weren't any other final comments that individuals wanted to make, then we can we can move into the Q&A portion at this time. I see that we have 4 questions that are queued up. So maybe we'll go through the questions in order, and they were kind of related to actually our conversation in order as well. So our first question here, this is specifically for Hao as well as Vanessa. Caitlin asks, where can we see your short films? How can we consume your content?
That's a question for Hao, the director.
Well, so New Year's Eve is right now you can see it on what is that called? Short of the Week. It's already online on Short of the Week, and you can also see some.
Is that
YouTube?
Is that YouTube? Short of the Week, or
no? Short of the Week is like a own platform website.
Oh.
It pretty much highlights like shorts of the week, I would say, and so yeah. So New Year's Eve is on that, and for my other projects, I guess you can Google me and come to my website, and then you can see some of those. But then for the chef. Right now, we're actually currently still talking with distributors. Hopefully, it will be up online soon. And one other short that I made, actually recently made, will be premiering on Disney Plus in May. So I'm not allowed to say, I would say anything more than that. But then, like, it's a film. It will be on Disney Plus in May.
Sounds very exciting. Very exciting. Vanessa, would you say the same things in terms of finding your content or for your works in progress? Do you have an idea in terms of where those might be?
Yeah, I can't say for the same, because that's the thing about being a screenwriter, is all the thing that I do is in confidential, and also is words not yet produced yet. So I would say go to look at Hao stuff first, and wait a couple of years till my feature come out.
And go see Vanessa's stand-up comedy.
Oh,
like
right.
yeah.
I'm trying to do more open mic after the world start opening up.
Well, that'll be very exciting.
Yeah.
Do you think they might end up on YouTube as well, or?
If they're good.
Okay, excellent. We'll be looking forward to it. Maybe when you get your Netflix special, we'll be looking forward to that. All right. Our next one is for Robert. This question asks if there are writers who want to write from a different perspective other than their own. So maybe a white individual that's writing Asian voices, or an Asian individual that's writing white voices, any other combination of it. How do you ensure that you're not misrepresenting these other perspectives?
So this is, as a non-writer, non-director, non-actor, non-artist, I'll give you my perspective. I think first and foremost, you have to do your homework and ask, why is this an important part of the character? And what is it about the character that you're trying to represent? What is it about it, the character that you're trying to represent? Encourage collaboration if the character is an important character in the story, making sure that we don't fall into the trap of stereotypes. And again, I keep harping on this, but starting off with the humanity of the character, and to what extent, if it is about a character's ethnicity, for example, is the area that you're going to explore. What is it about that ethnicity or their sexual identity or their ability status or any number of other aspects of who they are? What is it about them that's important to the story? And is that something that is likely to be experienced by the individual that you're trying to represent, or is this something that you think is likely to be experienced by it? And that's again doing what I would just say good work, good research, talking with folks. Collaboration again is another really key part to this.
Excellent, thank you, definitely. Our next one here is for Mike. It says, Mike, how do you think we can be more mindful of what we comment and how we engage in content? What can we do to encourage others to be more mindful of what they comment? Specifically, this was around our discussion of like kind of reading the comment section,
Right.
Rude comments that come in there.
That's a really good question. The closest advice I can think about is think before you speak, or just kind of just being aware of the fact that there's somebody that has put a lot more work into what you're watching, even though it's like a 4-minute video, 10-minute video, doesn't really matter, but just recognize that there has been a lot of effort put behind it. And I would say to be more empathetic, that your words matter a lot more than you think to somebody else.
Yeah, definitely. I'll add a little bit more potential academic perspective, maybe an industry perspective to this as well. There have been tools that these social networks have rolled out in order to kind of identify what content might be hateful, kind of reduce the spread of this hateful content. Could be very useful. We might see this rolled out more widely. That said, these systems are also potentially open to abuse. If we suppress voices that might be dissenting, then you lead to these echo chambers, right? And when we have these echo chambers, then we aren't mutually understanding each other. Another form of potential abuse is that if a lot of individuals gang up on an opinion, then you can get the system to falsely flag this content as being harmful. So pluses and minuses, some innovation being made there. Remains to be seen whether or not what the upshot of this will be. Excellent. Our next question. This one, I think, could potentially be answered by anyone. It asks, does Hollywood contribute to sexualizing, misrepresenting, and marginalizing Asian women and make them more vulnerable to violence? So I think this would probably be better directed at our two more Hollywood representatives. So either Hao or Vanessa, if you want to kind of comment on this.
Yeah, I like to comment on it. This is an interesting question because I don't think it's a real question in that way, because I feel like Hollywood can be substituted with a lot of different things. Does the public discourse is misspreading, is Twitter, is the social, like everything is, not only when you say Hollywood, it's like kind of like putting people in a monolith like everything else. But I would say from my personal experience, the filmmakers in Hollywood in my school and in the comedian world, I met so many supportive people and I learned so many different things. So I guess my response to the question is to think like, why is there this question, right? First of all, like, how can you view Hollywood? Like, I live right off Hollywood Boulevard, but am I Hollywood? I don't think so. I'm not even in the union. You know what I'm saying? Like there's so many different layers to the word, an umbrella of terms. So yeah, but also, does that, another side of the question is the media portrait of, Asian women is, misleading and sexual, like fetishized. Yes, of course. We are doing our work to make it, to make it better.
Definitely. How, did you have anything to add, or do you feel like that kind of summarizes your thoughts pretty well?
Yeah, I think yeah, like what Vanessa said.
Yeah, and definitely, is a whole of society problem, right? So we have these portrayals that are coming in from Hollywood, but it's also coming in through other forms of media. And of course, a lot of this content creation is driven by audiences' preconceived, perceptions, right? So you can think of the media that we consume as also a reflection of our society. Definitely is the case. Our next question, this one asks, I'm curious how you respond when people make the excuse, I don't want to read subtitles, when defending that they don't want to watch Asian language content. I guess, definitely relevant to all of our content creators here. What would you say?
I would ask, how old is this person? Where is he from or she from? Like, who says this? If it's a grandpa, I will say, okay, grandpa, you don't have to read it. But from my perspective, a lot of young people that I know like to read subtitles, and my husband is learning Chinese as we speak. So I don't know, like I see some good side of this.
And I totally agree with what Vanessa's saying, is that I think even I'm not really big into anime, but when I do watch it and I tell people that I watch it dubbed instead of subbed, I always often get frowned upon, because they say that it's not authentic and you don't really understand what's going on. So now I make a conscious effort to always watch it subbed. So yeah.
I guess, how have you, and I apologize for not knowing this in advance, but have a lot of your works been potentially dubbed into multiple different languages? And I guess if they do get dubbed, do you feel like anything is kind of lost through that process?
I think this Disney one will be dubbed into a lot of different languages, but then before that, I don't think it has been dubbed, but then it definitely has like so many different like subtitles, and it was a very interesting experience watching different subtitles. Like when we were in Japan, that was the first time that I read subtitles like vertically on the screen, and yeah, like so like yeah.
Yeah, and just to add on to that question, because I came from a film translation background. Our work was translating subtitles and dubbed films. And I just for people who are not from China, that actually is required that all TV shows have Chinese subtitles on them. It's kind of like a way to get people to get more literacy in the country. So I think as a Chinese person, if you grew up in China, you kind of like used to reading subtitles in Chinese TV show in Mandarin, right? And then when my job specifically was to translate film into dubbed film for CCTV6, the film channel in China. And it's a long history. China has a long history of translating foreign films into dubbed in Chinese. And I think I realized that America is not big on dubbed film. And it's basically like, if we don't understand it, we just don't watch it. But I'm from a perspective that things are either dubbed or subtitled, and we read subtitles all the time. Yeah, so that's kind of a different.
I know this was also a major part of the controversy around Minari not being considered a potentially domestic film, right, and being categorized as a foreign film, because a lot of the content there is in Korean. Definitely could be the case. We have another two comments, not exactly questions, but we have from Nicole as well as Caitlin. This is for Mike. They say they're longtime subscribers, huge fans of your work. So you've got at least a few big fans in the audience.
Thank you.
And then looks like we have one last one here. Our last one, it's actually a double question, and it is again from Mike. This one asks from Sabrina, what is your vision for CantoMando 5 years from now? And also, is there any content you would like to personally create for the YouTube channel in the near future?
A 5-year vision. I think we've talked about this before with the guys, and one of the biggest things that we want to do is to create a community and build something that can outlive ourselves. I definitely don't see myself being on screen when I am like making the same type of videos when I am in my 40s, 50s. The reason why I'm so hesitant on saying that number, because I don't want to offend anybody, anyone who year that is, but I just don't think I don't think I would be. I want to put my personal life out there as much, because being a content creator, a lot of your private lives is out in the public, and and I think in one of the recent videos, I've gone through a breakup, and then that was kind of tied to the channel, and you start to realize your private life is actually there. So I definitely want to build something that is bigger than us. So more so a hub or a channel where kind of like a game show, kind of run like a game show, maybe doing a little more talk show podcasting, and game show challenges where people come in and participate. And in terms, sorry, what was the second part of that question?
The second part of the question asks, is there any content that you would like to personally create for the YouTube channel in the near future? I guess, is there anything maybe central to you that you're really looking to make, maybe you haven't made yet?
Yeah. I think that one of the biggest things that I personally will want to do is to create more podcasts and conversations like the one that we're having today. When we started YouTube, I think we were around 2023, 22, 23. And there, like we did it for entertainment value. So there was not a lot of depth, but I think that the three of us have very different perspectives on certain things, and we disagree a lot, and we debate a lot, but at the end of the day, we have a unified vision. So I think that if we can open up the floor to have crucial conversations, whether it be about identity, representation, so people can take us a little more seriously instead of just being like an entertainer, for instance, I think that would be great. Yeah,
definitely. That is all the questions that we have right now. In that case, I just want to thank all of you guys, both you on the panel as well as everyone who tuned in. Thank you so much for coming into this event. The fact that you guys are here, it is really what makes it special. It's really what facilitates this very important conversation between all of us right now. Meir, I see that you're on standby. Do you want to tell everyone a little bit about some of the events that are coming up? Just give them a little reminder there.
Yeah, so definitely. That was a great, awesome discussion. Thank you guys so much for letting it happen. And so after this event, we'll have our automotive business, healthcare, and US-China relations panel lining up later on this weekend and also next weekend. And now, I wanted to just thank you all for all the audiences who tuned in tonight, and we would love for you to take a few moments and scan this QR code and provide your much appreciated feedback for our panel, so we could provide more content, better content, and also awesome guests as we have today. And then if you haven't already, our next panel, the automotive panel, feel free to RSVP if you're interested. And that will be all for today's content. And thank you guys again for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'd also give just one last shout out. Again, please check out Hao and Vanessa's works coming to screens near you. Please also shout out to Mike and his channel, CantoMando. For those of you that aren't already following it, very interesting content on there. Would definitely recommend following and subscribing to their channel. And thank you so much, Robert, for joining us here today. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.